Good morning, or I'm sorry, good afternoon. It's just afternoon, just a little bit before one. I'm glad to have you here today for another Wall Street Journal dissection. I picked, I think, about 7 articles today. Some of them pretty quickly, some of them a little bit more, and I've got a graph, another graph to show you today. I want some feedback on the graphs to see how that's helping you understand the news articles, if it's helping or not. So, so a couple follow-ups, some previous. I'm getting some great feedback from listeners. One I did on the Apple's announcement, including the iWatch, in the announcement that the new iWatch 6 is tracking oxygen levels. So a reader, Danny, a watcher, Danny, had gotten back to me and said he had watched the Apple announcement, and that oxygen level is done over time and actually graphs it for you. So that's a pretty interesting. That's a significant improvement in the health capabilities of that watch. Remember the pandemic. Real issue with the COVID is that your oxygen level starts dropping dramatically, and a lot of people don't even realize it. How dangerously low it is before they get it checked and find out it's so low. So that's a pretty significant achievement in that watch, and I wanted to pass that on. Thanks, Danny. And the other thing I wanted to point out, I'm starting to ask more questions. I'm finding out that I'm not near as smart as I thought I was, but fire containment. When you hear the word fire containment, 100%, what does that mean? Is the fire 100% put out? So lots of us, people who just made assumptions, believe that. So fire containment doesn't measure how much of the fire is out at all, not at all. Okay, so fire containment just says how much of the fire is ringed and stopped and contained, and it should have been a hint. Dumber people like me should have looked at the word containment and said, wait a minute, why is the word containment in there? That's exactly what it is. So you could have 1,000 acres completely on fire, but if it's ringed by either a fire lane or a natural, like a lake or a highway, 4-lane, 6-lane highway that provides a natural fire break, if it's completely ringed around that fire, even though every bit of the 1,000 acres is on fire and blazing, that is 100% contained. Okay, so containment only tells you that it looks like it won't spread anymore. So that's the measure. So if a fire is 5% contained, that's you should be alarmed, because depending on the property around it, it could keep spreading and getting larger and larger. So that's the also, there's a question on how large is the fire. That's a pretty scientific discussion. We'll probably have one of these days, and I'll bring that up. But containment, I wanted to make sure to pass that on to you. So first article, hospitals needed nurses, not ventilators. So great article on a large hospital here in Phoenix, where I'm located. I'm located north of Phoenix. Banner, called Banner. They represent, by the way, 43% of the beds in Phoenix, and they're larger than the next two largest hospitals together. Right? That's a huge operation in Phoenix, and those of you who live in this area know that. So they've been working on efficiency moves, as a lot of hospitals, and this last year they've dropped that. In 2019, they had reduced the need for employees per bed by 2%. So huge efficiency move. Obviously, they're profit making. Banner's a huge profit making, $6 billion profit, I think, last year, and huge move to clinics for growth. We'll get back to that a little bit as we looked at what we needed for the pandemic, but lots of growth in the clinics and kind of emergency rooms in the clinics instead of going to the hospital. So in June, the hospital started filling with very sick patients needing almost one-on-one nurses, okay? There weren't enough nurses, okay? So, and so you go back to remember this, hospitals are not little sisters of the poor charity operations anymore, right? They just have to break even. They have to make a lot of money. So, so when the pandemic hit, here's these large hospitals in metro areas with not enough nurses. And then what made the situation worse is some of the smaller hospitals were in some of the worst hit areas. And let's take Arizona, Yuma, down on the Mexico border, southwest corner. Not a desirable place to live in Phoenix. I got to tell you, I mean, we joke about it often in this state. And by the way, they have trouble getting nurses down there, right? They're always needing nurses. They don't have enough. So they were sending their patients to Phoenix area hospitals because they didn't have enough room and didn't have enough nurses. So at the peak of it, they were sending 11 patients a day by helicopter to Phoenix area hospitals. 11 patients a day. Think about that, and think about the large hospitals and ability to accept that. And why were they sending? No nurses. Okay, so and then of course we've got this idea of travel nurses. And some of you might not have heard of this, but there's organizations that have travel nurses that have 3-month contracts at different hospitals. They travel around the United States. They go. They would go to the poorer hospitals because those were the ones that had trouble getting nurses, so they would hire contract nurses. Actually, now what happened was the richer hospitals upped the contracts. In fact, one nurse tripled her contract price from the last contract to the next one in the middle of the pandemic because they needed nurses so much. And so now the well-heeled hospitals were getting the travel nurses, and the ones that really needed them, like a Yuma, were not getting them. So lots of things went on there, and I want to show that complexity. But go back in history. Remember the daily cry for ventilators, okay? And we just need more ventilators. We need more ventilators. At the time, if you had listened to me, you'd have heard me telling you, look, we got to check to see if the hospitals have enough people to operate those ventilators. By the way, they didn't. The fact became well known. You had to be qualified. They usually were only used in intensive care and surgery. So very few people qualified. Nurses were qualified on them, and it was an issue. But at the same time, did you hear the cry for nurses? There was some cry in New York City, and I know a friend of mine traveled out there to do some, I think a 30-day stint out there. But all the cry was for rooms and ventilators, right? New York City needed more rooms when in fact we found out they didn't. And they needed more ventilators when in fact we found out they didn't. So, but we didn't hear anything about nurses. So we worked on the wrong things. Absolutely. Worked on the wrong things. Why? Bad data. We had bad data. And by the way, I relate this to the nursing home thing that we allowed lots of elderly patients to die of COVID when we should have had data to tell us that's where you go look first. And that's where you go address COVID first. It's the most dangerous place. And of course, we did the opposite. We sent sick patients back to nursing homes. So, and by the way, in Phoenix, there was a directive in Phoenix as soon as your hospitalization rate got up to 80% in the ICU and stuff, the hospital had to go find additional room and to go, take room away from other operations and reduce surgeries and so on. And in all of that effort, nobody ever looked at, when you get the hospital room and you get the ventilator, will there be a nurse for the room? And remember, Banner was working, maybe a ratio of one intensive care patient to and three. A nurse would handle 3 intensive care beds at the same time, 2 to 3. Now they're really stretched because they're very, very sick patients. They need almost a 1-to-1, and there's just no nurses available. So this is the problem when you have bad data. And early on in the pandemic, there should have been an effort on, and many of us thought They really should have been a presidential team focused entirely on data and making the best data available so we can make the best decisions. But they didn't do that. So bad data, you work on the wrong things. So so the state bureaucracy is hurting the fire prevention in California. So in fact, it's in the way of fire prevention. So article today on Berry Creek, California. So after the 2018 fire, that's the Paradise Fire, right? That town was completely wiped out. So they saw that fire and said, no, we got to do something. Berry Creek said, we got to do something in our area before we get to look like Paradise. And so they put in approval request to do forest thinning. And primarily it was along a major evacuation route, and they widened that. They were going to widen that. I think it was a cost of $836,000, not much, 234 acres. So it really was for a fire break. And then there was one other minor area around one neighborhood that was at high risk. So they submitted that 2 years ago. Do you know when that got approved? A week ago, right before the fire that's wiped out Berry Creek. Too late. 2 years for the state to work on this. Why? Well, lots of reasons. I mean, some of it had to go to private landowners. Some private landowners didn't want thinning of their land, and of course they had to fight that. There should have been ways for the state government to say, sorry, this is an emergency. You don't get to decide anymore. There's also environmentalists that don't want these big fire breaks. They don't like looking up these hills and seeing these huge scraped off areas. And so there's lots of things going on. By the way, the fire people prove, look, when you thin, you get lower flames. The flames are lower and slower moving. Everything you want to try to protect a town that's close to it. So what do you want? I got to ask you again. Do you want more or less government? What do you want? Meanwhile, we heard Governor Newsom a week ago when he was with Trump, and what is he talking about? Climate change. Yeah. And meanwhile, it took him 2 years to get this forest thinning project. This is the thing that I think Trump has made inroads from a lot of people. A lot of things he's done wrong, but I got to tell you this thing about regulations. I talked about yesterday when it's stealth taxation with regulations. Stealth taxation's on the very poor, right? The ones that can't afford it. The other thing about regulations it has consequences. In California, had consequence of this fire. I wonder if there'll be any suits. Of course, we all know the ability to sue states and state governments is very limited, right? And for good reasons, right? This is another good reason why they don't want to be sued. But so anyways, focus on climate change. Take 2 years to approve a forest thinning project. Okay. By the way, in the Oregon fires, there's some belief now in the Wall Street Journal today that some power lines may be at fault for some of them fires. Not real good proof yet, and certainly not 100% caused by power lines. By the way, you talk about government bureaucracy. Here we go again. Oregon PUC, Public Utilities Commission, has been assessing plans to allow utilities to turn off these certain power lines in high winds. They're still assessing this. I don't know, if they'll speed up now or not, but I suspect not. So some of these things ought to be determined as Trump did in the pandemic areas, is got regulations out of the way in certain areas. And I think he did a very good job of that. And I think that's a lesson learned for many state governments, that we need to get some things out of the way. Biden on immigration. So Biden has flip-flopped, as many politicians have, and Trump has too, but Biden is gone back and forth on immigration. 2006, he voted to fund 700 miles of fencing on the southern border between Mexico and the U.S. Now he calls Trump's wall an obsession. He says Trump's obsession, this wall. And he vows to close construction of the wall that's currently being built. He's not answered a question. By the way, nobody's asked this question of him because, and many people, if you've read the news lately, believe that he's getting very preferable treatment from the news organizations. But the real question is, Mr. Biden, how many miles of that wall that you say is obsession was never needed, and by the way, creates problems by being there, how many miles of that wall are you going to tear down? So far, Trump has built 300 additional miles, okay? He committed to that, he promised it, and he's built it. So I think he's to be honored for making that commitment and following through, even though it was very difficult. Fought a lot of suits on it, Congress on it, and still got it built. But the real question to Biden, to Vice President Biden, I apologize. I don't mean to leave titles out. I feel strongly about that, by the way. Whether I care for the person or not, we should not refer to Trump. We should refer to President Trump. Whether you hate him or love him, the titles are earned and they deserve, and our society, I think, requires, our honesty and integrity requires we use them. I digress. So the other thing I want to talk, I'm going to do occasionally this facts versus truths, because it's, I may write a book around that, but it's an interesting concept, because many people will say, I have the facts. I have the facts. Well, they may have one fact, but they may not have the truth, or at least express the truth. And so many times when you'll hear this about Trump's wall, and you'll say there's 300 miles that Trump has built, but all but 5 replace existing barriers. So the assumption is, oh, he's putting a different wall up, maybe a better wall, maybe a taller wall, but there was a wall there before. So that's not true. And by the way, I travel to Mexico very frequently. I've seen the wall. I've camped within 100, 200 feet of the wall on the Mexican side, by the way. I've camped where I could hit a golf ball to it. So I know the wall very well down in that area. Sonora, down near Sonora to Lukeville, for those of you who are familiar, on the south side, on the way to Puerto Penasco, Mexico, the resort area. So many parts of that wall were a vehicle barrier. Now, a vehicle barrier is just a single log, a board, a 4x4, propped about 3 foot in the air with crossbars, every 10, 12 feet, so that you can't drive a 4-wheel drive vehicle through there. It's a vehicle barrier is what it's called. To walk through that barrier, all you have to do is bend down to your waist level very quickly and get underneath that 4x4 board, and you're on the other side. There's no barbed wire fence. There's no lights. There's no camera. Don't go crazy on me, okay? I've seen it. It is a vehicle barrier, and so the vehicles drive right up to it. By the way, drop people off. There's buses that drop in that area between Yuma and Sonora de Lukeville. Buses actually make a bus stop there, and the illegals are dropped off and walk a few hundred feet, go underneath the vehicle barrier, and they're in the U.S. Okay, it's easy. So there's a difference between facts and truth. You can't argue with this fact. If somebody puts a meme up that says all but 5 of those miles had existing barriers, that fact is true, but it leaves a lot out. And when it leaves a lot out, and I hope to do that in my program. I hope to give you both sides of that story, and so that you can make your decision based on both sides. You may still vote for the guy, whether he's going to remove any of it or not. He will not remove any of that wall, right? Won't happen, but we'll see. Next article, Pennsylvania mail-in ballot deadlines extended. So the judges have decided that ballots received the Friday after election counts as long as they were postmarked by 8 p.m. election day. So now we have ballots that, as long as the post office gets them in their sorting facility and runs them through their postmarking machine, their stamp machine, late, right, about the time polls close, right, 8 p.m. must be polls closed right in that area. As long as they get stamped at that time, they're treating it the same way as if somebody was in the voting booth and voted by 8 p.m. as polls close. But by the way, they're going to be delivered up to a week later. We know that, okay? So they cut the deadline as the Friday after. So Pennsylvania, by the way, is a swing state. Many people believe it's swing state. We won't know for sure until afterwards. But so we've now taken one of the states in play and said, we may not know on that election until 5-6 days later while they're still counting, okay? This is the problem with mail-in ballots, okay? And the post office tried to do their job and warn everybody, but it hasn't helped. Enough of the ballots. New Jersey does it again. Raises the state tax rate to 10.75% from 8.97% on income greater than 1 million. Okay, so they're going after the millionaires, right? This is the millionaire tax. They can afford it. They ought to really help out, right? So 2 years ago, by the way, they'd raised it to 10.75 on those above 5 million. Now they've gone to 1 million people, okay? So, and by the way, the money is going to be handed out to people under, like under 30,000, single payroll earners under $35,000 a year. So it's an income redistribution, right? They won't say that. This is another fact versus truth. This is an income redistribution. We're taking money from millionaires and giving it direct, by the way, direct contribution directly in a payment, okay, to poor people. I'm not arguing whether they need it or not. I'm just saying this is what it really is. So not only is it a tax on the high income earners, it's an income redistribution. So so what have they left out of this? What have they not acknowledged? Well, they haven't acknowledged that millionaires are usually somewhat portable in their living arrangements. They can move. They can sell their house and move. They're not stuck to their location. And by the way, Connecticut is still pretty much a much better tax environment than New York and New Jersey. And so Connecticut may be doing a campaign very quickly on drawing people from New Jersey over there to move, especially high incomers. High income earners, I predict whatever they predicted to get out of this tax will get less than half of it. And they will claim that a victory, okay, and say it worked again. But my view is it failed miserably because they didn't account for people being able to move. So last article, I wanted to share a screen here with you. I'll pull it up here real quick. Give me 2 seconds. I want to make sure that I'm seeing this correctly. So I wanted to show you about the offices. I tracked this story a while, and those of you that watch me, you know, see that I keep coming back to it. Wall Street Journal is doing a pretty good job of looking at this, because obviously people that read the Wall Street Journal are concerned about office occupancy, and many of them run companies and wonder what they're doing versus other companies. So as you can see, this on the left hand is the percent of occupancy, you know, 0 down at the bottom, 100% at the very top. And you can see in February, real close to 100%, you know, occupancy of these offices, okay? And you can see as the pandemic hits, and then, you know, March, April, it just starts to die, right? And really by April, it's way down to 40%. What's interesting is that while we've seen the offices, the companies come back, the office occupancy rate has not climbed very much. It's gone from 40 to about 50%. Okay. And it seems to be leveling off. It's not climbing anymore. We'll see, in the next month may give us a better indication of this. But by the way, this is office space. I have data on manufacturing retail is down about a third. It didn't take as big a biggest drop because obviously people have to be there, right? Versus office, they can work from home. Hard for a warehouse worker to work from home. And retail, by the way, is only down about a third. Again, same thing. Hard to sell clothes at J.C. Penney from your house. So you watch this space, watch this news. It may be that this isn't coming back, that offices are not going to come back anywhere near the 100%. And I'm predicting maybe 60, 65% for whatever worth my predictions are. I think that's about the highest we're going to get. Lots of companies are dealing with how to get by with much less office space. And I think that's where they're going to be for the near future. So that's it for today. I sure enjoyed having you here and appreciate your comments, and have a great weekend, and hope to see you tomorrow. I'll get some quick updates out of the Saturday paper in for you, and see you back Monday. Have a great holiday, great weekend, and thanks again for watching. I appreciate all of my fans. Cheers.